4004. A calculator chip accidentally invented the future, and Intel almost said no. In 1971, a Japanese calculator company called Busicom commissioned Intel to build 12 custom chips, 12 separate chips for one calculator. Federico Faggin, an Italian engineer who'd just joined Intel, looked at the specs and thought, "This is insane." He convinced the team to build one chip that could be programmed instead. One chip to rule them all. The Intel 4004 had 2,300 transistors. For context, a modern iPhone chip has 16 billion. It ran at 740 kilohertz. Your microwave probably has more processing power. It could barely add numbers, but it was programmable. That was the revolution. Busicom went bankrupt. Intel bought back the rights for $60,000. Best 60 grand they ever spent. Except Intel's executives didn't think microprocessors had a future. They wanted to focus on memory chips. That's where the money was. Faggin had to fight to keep the project alive. The chip that would define computing. For the next 50 years, almost got killed in a boardroom. This calculator chip became the blueprint for every computer processor ever made. Intel accidentally created the microprocessor industry while trying to help a calculator company save money on components. Intel almost killed the thing that would make them the most powerful chip company on Earth. Remember that pattern, because it happens again. And next time, the stakes get way higher when a typo changes everything. 8086. Intel created the architecture that runs your computer right now because a competitor's chip was too good, and IBM needed something cheaper. By 1978, Motorola's 68000 was the hot new processor. Beautiful design. Everyone wanted it. Intel panicked and rushed out the 8086 to compete. 29,000 transistors, 16-bit architecture, proper power. Problem? Nobody wanted it. Too expensive. Wrong timing. Intel was getting destroyed, so they compromised. The 8088 used the same internal 16-bit processing as the 8086, but an 8-bit external bus. Cheaper to manufacture. Could use existing 8-bit components that were already mass-produced. It was the backup plan. The discount version. Then, IBM started designing the first personal computer. They needed a processor. The 8088 was cheaper than the 8086 and way cheaper than Motorola's 68000. IBM chose Intel's compromise chip because it saved them money on the motherboard. That decision locked in x86 architecture, not because it was better, because it was cheaper. The IBM PC became the standard. Everyone cloned it. x86 became the foundation of personal computing for the next 50 years. Intel won the PC revolution with their backup plan. Their inferior chip beat the superior competition because of a cost-saving decision. This compromise architecture would make Intel billions. And that same architecture would nearly destroy them decades later when the world stopped caring about backwards compatibility and started caring about efficiency. Pentium. Intel spent $100 million on branding a chip that couldn't do math correctly, and somehow this made them unstoppable. By 1993, Intel had a problem. They couldn't trademark 586 because it's just a number. Competitors could call their chips 586, and there was nothing Intel could do. So they invented a brand name, Pentium. Sounded scientific. Sounded premium. They launched the biggest marketing campaign in tech history. Intel Inside, stickers everywhere. 3.1 million transistors. Superscalar architecture. 60 to 100 megahertz. Real power. Then, a math professor named Thomas Nicely discovered the Pentium had a floating point division bug. Certain calculations gave wrong answers. He posted about it online. Intel's response: it only affects scientists doing complex calculations. Normal users won't notice. The tech community lost their minds. IBM halted all Pentium PC shipments. Intel refused to recall. The press coverage was brutal. Intel finally caved, offered free replacements to anyone who wanted one. Cost them $475 million. Here's the twist. The controversy made Pentium a household name. Suddenly, everyone cared about processor brands. Your grandma knew what a Pentium was. The math bug turned into the greatest accidental marketing campaign in history. Intel learned they could survive catastrophic failures through branding. That confidence would make them sloppy. And when they finally faced real competition, that sloppiness would cost them everything. Core 2 Duo, Intel's best chip ever, was built by the team headquarters told to shut up and get back to work. Early 2000s, Intel was obsessed with clock speed. The Pentium 4 hit 3 GHz, then kept climbing. Marketing loved it. Bigger number means better, right? Meanwhile, AMD's Athlon 64 was destroying Intel in actual performance per watt. Intel's Israeli design team kept warning headquarters. Clock speed is a dead end. You're hitting thermal limits. Headquarters ignored them. Pushed Pentium 4 to 4 GHz. The chip ran so hot it needed massive cooling solutions. Desktop space heaters. Intel hit a wall. Physics won. Finally, Intel admitted defeat. Canceled the entire Pentium 4 roadmap. Gave the Israeli team who designed the Pentium M laptop chip full control. Build something better. Core 2 Duo, 291 million transistors, 1.86 to 2.93 gigahertz. Lower clock speeds than Pentium 4, but vastly more efficient architecture. It crushed AMD overnight. Performance per watt wasn't even close. Intel's best chip came from the team they'd been ignoring for years. They won by admitting they were completely wrong about their flagship strategy. Intel learned humility for about 5 years. Then AMD collapsed, and Intel had zero competition. That's when they started making the worst decisions in their history. Turns out winning too hard is its own kind of disaster. Core i7-2600K, Intel, made a chip so good that people still refuse to upgrade from it in 2025, and they never recovered from that success. Sandy Bridge architecture in 2011 was a complete redesign. 995 million transistors, 32 nanometer process, 3.4 gigahertz base clock, 4.5 overclocked. Intel integrated graphics directly onto the CPU die. Revolutionary stuff. It absolutely destroyed AMD's market share. AMD couldn't compete for nearly a decade. Gamers bought it. Professionals bought it. Everyone bought Sandy Bridge. Intel had won. Here's the problem. It was too good. The i7-2600K from 2011 could still run modern games in 2018. People had zero reason to upgrade. Intel's TikTok development cycle, where they'd alternate between new architecture and die shrink, started slowing down. Without competition, why rush? Intel got lazy. 5 to 10% performance improvements, year over year, became acceptable. The 2600K killed upgrade cycles. Intel's greatest engineering achievement became their worst business problem. They had infinite money and zero competition. AMD was basically dead. Intel could have invested heavily in next-generation manufacturing, could have pushed 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer processes. Instead, they milked Sandy Bridge's architecture for years. Intel had every advantage. Somehow, they used this to fall catastrophically behind. And it starts with a manufacturing decision in 2016 that Intel is still paying for today. Turns out you can't just skip physics. Core i99900K. Intel added more cores to an outdated architecture, cranked the power consumption to space heater levels, and called it innovation, while AMD was eating their lunch. AMD released Ryzen in 2017. Suddenly competitive again. More cores for less money. Intel was still stuck on 14 nanometer manufacturing. They were supposed to ship 10 nanometer chips by 2016. Didn't happen. Manufacturing delays kept stacking. Engineers couldn't solve the yield. Problems. Intel's solution: just add more cores and crank the clock speed higher. The 9900K had 8 cores, 16 threads, 3.6 to 5 gigahertz, still 14 nanometers, 4th generation on the same process node. That's not innovation. That's desperation with a fresh coat of paint. 95-watt TDP officially. Actually drew over 150 watts under load. Required expensive cooling solutions, or it would thermal throttle. Your gaming PC now doubled as a room heater. Intel was still winning in raw gaming performance. Barely. But they were losing everywhere else. Price to performance, power efficiency, the innovation narrative. They'd become the company they beat in 2006, just cranking speed and hoping nobody noticed. The 9900K represented peak "we have no plan." Premium prices for brute force solutions. Intel kept promising 10 nanometer was coming soon. Spoiler, it wasn't. And the delay would cost them everything. Because while Intel was stuck, TSMC was building the future for Intel's competitors. Core i9-1 2900K. Intel copied ARM's homework, finally shipped a modern process node, and proved they could still innovate when actual extinction was on the table. By 2021, Intel was in crisis. AMD dominated desktop market share. Apple ditched Intel entirely for their M1 chip. Intel's stock was tanking. This was existential. The gamble: hybrid architecture, big performance cores plus small efficiency cores working together. Alder Lake straight up copied ARM's big dot little design from smartphone chips. 16 cores total. 8 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores. Up to 5.2 gigahertz. Finally shipped on Intel's 7 process. That's what they called it. Really just rebranded 10 nanometer after years of delays and embarrassment. But it worked. The 12900K beat AMD in gaming, matched them in productivity workloads. Tech reviewers called it Intel's return to form. Vindication. Except it required Windows 11 for proper thread scheduling. The operating system had to decide which core handles which task. Thread director managing traffic. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Intel was competitive again, but only by adopting smartphone architecture. They'd permanently lost the manufacturing lead to TSMC. AMD was shipping 5 nanometer chips made by TSMC. Intel was on 7 nanometer, which was really 10 nanometer with marketing. Intel was back in the fight, but fighting with borrowed ideas on borrowed time. And their next chip would reveal just how desperate they'd actually become. Core Ultra 9200-85000. Intel's newest flagship performs worse than the chip it replaced, and that might be the most honest thing they've released in a decade. Intel dropped the branding entirely. Fresh start marketing. Arrow Lake was supposed to be built on Intel 20A, their cutting-edge process, except it wasn't. Manufacturing failed again. Intel had to outsource production to TSMC's 3 nanometer process. They admitted publicly they can't manufacture their own flagship designs anymore. Up to 24 cores. New architecture focused on efficiency over raw performance. Reviewers tested it, and the results were brutal. Gaming performance regressed compared to the 14900K. The chip it was supposed to replace beat it in the benchmarks people actually care about. Productivity workloads were better. Power efficiency improved. But enthusiasts didn't want efficiency. They wanted speed. Reviews called it a step backward. Intel's launch was a disaster. Here's the existential crisis. Intel is now a chip design company that can't make chips. They're relying on TSMC, the same foundry making AMD and Apple processors. Their competitors' chips. Intel is competing with ARM-based laptops that sip power, while x86 architecture guzzles it. After 50 years, Intel doesn't control its own destiny. They invented the microprocessor. Now, they're fabless by necessity, not choice. That's either a temporary setback or the beginning of the end. And honestly, we're watching it happen in real time.